that was Ranbaxy's story.
The pharmaceutical industry, you know, those patents exist for 17 years, and it's a good thing because the company that comes out with the formula in the first place has invested typically millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in doing research and lab tests to try to get the patent in the first place, so they need to recoup the money. That 17 years that's there for them is largely there so they can recoup some of the money back and make themselves a hefty profit. But you're right, as soon as the drug goes generic, now you've got all these competitors out there, which is good for us as a consumer. Price goes down. But then you realize that there's a lot of these companies that exist in that sweet space just waiting for the patent to expire so they can pounce on it. And, well, I hope in this case, these are Indian companies, that they don't get hung up by red tape that's self-imposed. It shouldn't be the result of, again, corruption or bad practices or bad business practices.
Well, that's what they found. In fact, they found that the facilities where they're going to make this were the ones that were involved in forwarding false information to the FDA. So now they're saying that particular facility, you can't make it. So now the Ranbaxy company is saying, wait a second, we're not going to make it in India. We want to make it in New Jersey. So now you've got
Brilliant.
FDA, without having to lift a finger, has moved one company out of India to New Jersey, and they can do a lot more.
So it's another kind of outsourcing.
Yeah.
Well, another company in India that is struggling just to stay afloat is Air India. You know, Air India has been around the longest of all the airlines in India because it's the national airline. In fact, the government owns Air India. And I know when I first came here many years ago as a child, I came on an Air India jet.
I think Air India flight used to be great. I remember that whenever you went to India on an Air India flight, it was a festive atmosphere in the flight. But today, you know, I don't hear many people go to India, even though they have cheaper fares. Air India is not a airline that's preferred anymore.
It's not. And in fact, a few years ago, the Indian government deregulated that space, which means a lot of new private airlines came in, and they've done very well for themselves. These are not new names for those of us Indians that travel a lot. Jet Airways, Kingfisher, and Indigo Airlines have all done very, very well.
They used to be domestic, and then they were allowed to go national, compete with Air India.
And now many of them, Jet Airways offers flights even to Britain and so forth. So this is a growing space for these private airlines, but not for Air India. In fact, Air India only has now 15% of India's domestic air travel market. And as a result, it's lost more than $1 billion in taxpayer money in just this past year. So there's a lot of cries internally in the government. Well, there's allegations of bad management.
It's not because the business is not there. The business is actually booming. There are more travelers leaving India. So it's not the business. It is the management. They can't seem to get it right.
And actually, that has been cited in this article by the New York Times. You know, up until now, Air India had been lucky that they had not been called out for their faulty inspections and security practices. But in April 2010, there was an airline crash, which caused a lot of negative press for Air India. There was pilot strikes that happened. And, you know, something else interesting that happened is India, in an attempt to recruit pilots from other countries, it allowed its age for pilots to go up. Most pilots retire at 60, but they pumped the age up to 65, hoping to attract and recruit a lot of foreign pilots because there was a pilot shortage in India. But guess what? A lot of those pilots, when they came and saw how the company was run and their safety practices and not following code, they left. They left in droves. So now you have a state-owned Air India airline that's basically struggling, and there are calls now within the government to just do away with it, telling the Indian government, sell it, get out of it.
You know, but they don't want to sell it. I don't know why. They should sell it.
I think that's becoming
government has no business in running an airline.
I agree. And unfortunately, Vayalar Ravi, who is the civil aviation minister, said that he has no intention, there's no question of Air India being shut or privatized. He says they're working to fix the problems and they're trying to win back customers. Air India is slashing fares and planning to expand, even though it loses money on 90%, 95% of its flights. Folks, you can probably get a cheap ticket on Air India, but the way this article is written, it doesn't seem like it's a safe choice to make.
For a flying public, what difference, or who cares who owns it? As long as the service is good and they get us there safely, that's all we're looking for. From the Forbes magazine, I was looking at it. A lot of billionaires nowadays are willing to give money to causes of their choosing.
Bill Gates started that, and Warren Buffett started that by giving Bill Gates so much money for his charitable foundation.
That's true. In fact, Bill Gates gave the most, which is $28 billion, and his charity was malaria, public health, and education. And number 2 is Warren Buffett, $8.3 billion, and all he did was give it to Gates Foundation to do whatever they're doing. But there is one name that I thought I should bring it, Azim Premji of India.
Wow.
You know, even though he's worth $16.8 billion, he gave $2.1 billion to education in India, which is extremely important to him. And I like that because of the 20 names, if you see, 12 are American and all but 1 are self-made.
You know, this is a new space, I think, for Indian millionaires and billionaires to be in. They have not been in this long enough to think about charity and to think about investing back in the community. Up until now, it's been about feeding our stomachs and our families' stomachs for now. So
yeah,
I
but
think now
billionaires don't need to worry about stomachs anymore. But at the same time, yeah, it takes time to develop that.
It takes time. I also think now that there is an international club, and to be a player in that club, to belong to that elite, you have to start being charitable.
You know, Ted Turner's on it, and he started very early. He gave $1 billion to UN, if you remember. We even had the people of his foundation here on Darshan Television. But it's a good thing to give.
It is.
It needs to be very strategic and very program-driven.
You should look for a return even on charitable contributions because you want to see them make a positive impact. I like this story because, for once, you're not just asking someone how rich they are, but you're asking, what are you giving back?
That's right.
Right? That is now the new definition of being rich, which I like.
You know, last week, folks, we did the story about some of the Indian American folks have been caught red-handed, you know, committing fraud, and they're being caught, and they're really putting a pretty bad light on us. Rajat Gupta, for one, you know, I mean, he has put a very bad light on the IIT community. So we got a letter from one of the folks who was watching. His name is Gujendra Bedi, and he does give us kudos that, how very few Indian Americans spoiling our good image in this land of opportunity, USA. These Indians are already making millions and want to become billionaire by doing wrong practices, corruption, and using unlawful activities. That's not for everybody. This is not generalizing it. Yeah, there are a few folks who are doing this. And then Gujendra Bedi makes a right turn and talks about how come we don't talk about the Golden Temple massacre that occurred in Indira Gandhi's time. You know, I would say one thing. Yes, we have talked about it sometime. We have Prime Minister in India, Manmohan Singh, who is a Sikh religion, and he should be the one who should also be trying to look into it. And I'm sure India is going to look at it. We, of course, thank Mr. Bedi for sending us his feedback.
And the key point he made that I also liked in his letter was he appreciated the fact that we on our show said last time that we should speak out more when these things happen. As a community, we should condemn these kinds of practices. We should not condone them by being quiet and being silent. And so he readily acknowledged that, and so I wanted to say thank you for getting our message.
Yes.
Well, speaking of feedback, Ramesh, you know, my biggest critic is always my family, my mom in particular. And she gave me some wonderful feedback last week. She said, you know, it's important for us because we are Indian Americans and we broadcast here from the United States that we talk about what has happened to our country here in the United States, which is the ravaging tornadoes that have come through the Midwest. We haven't really touched on this story very much because the news broadcasts have done such a wonderful job of letting us know the devastation that has occurred. But, you know, I was reading a few things about the tornadoes that take place. By the way, for those who may not know, the United States is a very special country in that because of the way our mountain ranges are, we produce these tornadoes. They're kind of unique to the United States and into that middle region of the country. So when they hit strong, and they hit in the Midwest.
That's right.
Which in some ways is not good for the country because all of our industries and economic hubs, if you will, are on the East Coast and the West Coast. Yeah. The middle part of the country is where we produce, where we have farmland. It's the bread belt, if you will. It's where really the heartland, and it's called the heartland of the United States for a reason. That's why. And when these tornadoes come through that part of the country, it is like ripping at the core of the country. And you see these pictures, you see the devastation, and you realize, you know, we concern ourselves with wars and we concern ourselves with crises and recession. These are people that are facing something so different.